here on PennLive. We're having a wonderful Thursday. It's U.S. Open weekend, Johnny. I know you're pumped for that. I mean, Oakmont looks unbelievable right now. It's going to be a fun one to keep track of if you are keeping track of it, because that course is going to eat some people up. But we love it. More recruiting talk coming for us here on the Penn State side of things. Like we say every week, it's summer, so these official visit weekends are hot and heavy each week through the month of June before we get a little bit of a cool down in July. But of course, that also means it's camp season, so we get to see a few of these guys up close and personal. Or I did last weekend, being out there at the 7-on-7s in the big man camp. But Johnny, as always, first things first, how we feeling?
Doing well, Max. Yeah, you mentioned U.S. Open weekend. We're recording this as we always do at noon live on Thursday. Scotty, Colin Morikawa, and Victor Hovland going off at I think 125. So we'll have some gap in between the end of this podcast, knock out some work, and settle in and try to watch some of that, because very much looking forward to seeing how Scotty deals with Oakmont, because that place is an absolute beast. The rough is ridiculous, and some guys putting up some scores early, but at the same time, I wouldn't be surprised if the winning score is just over par when things are all said and done on Sunday. But golfers have U.S. Open to deal with this weekend in Oakmont, just a few hours away in State College. James Franklin and his staff are going to be hosting another official visit weekend with some big names on campus as per usual, and we'll get into that, towards the end of the podcast. But before we talk about maybe some big offensive line names that they have coming to campus for future offensive lines, the Phil Troutwine will coach. I thought it would be kind of cool if we talked a little bit about Penn State's current offensive line, and just following up from the assistant coach availability that we had last week that, we got so much out of. And I was able to spend some really good time talking to Phil Troutwine about an offensive line that he thinks, can win the Joe Moore Award, that can be, the best in college football. And so I feel like we can start there and then kind of get into recruiting a little bit.
Yeah, Johnny, it's your runway here. You've posted a couple of stories this week. First and foremost about Vanga Ioane, presumably starting left guard for Penn State. Could be some flexibility there, but the kid's been really good last year, and even when he was bursting onto the scene 2 years ago, and those expectations are sky high. In addition to another story you posted, I believe this morning, just kind of about, like you said, the Joe Moore Award potential, which is really kind of a huge shift in what we've seen from Penn State's offensive line in the past 5 years. And that's a huge credit to Phil Troutwine, excuse me. But enlighten me, enlighten the live listeners. What do you got from Phil?
Yeah, so I'll start with the Joe Moore Award bit of it, because it smacks you in the face when you walk into Penn State's offensive line room. So, just a little behind the curtain. So last week when we were up there in State College, well, you lived there. When I was up there in State College, along with a bunch of other media members, we were inside the Lash building for a coach availability, assistant coach availability. We talked to James Franklin in the team room for about 15 minutes. And then there's just a long hallway where all of the position group meeting rooms are. And it kind of doubles as the position group coach's office. So you walk into the offensive line room, and directly to the right, and pretty much all these rooms are the same, right? You got a bunch of whiteboards, you've got seats for the guys to sit, podium/desk for the coach. But you walk in the room, and directly to the right, you see a poster kind of just taped to the whiteboard in the offensive line room. And it says, "This is our year." And it's the Joe Moore Award, which is given to the best offensive line in college football. And so, of course, we had to ask Phil Troutwine, the offensive line coach, about that and about his belief that this group can be the best offensive line in college football. And he said that I truly believe more than any other year, or unlike any year of his time at Penn State, that they can actually win it this year. And it's a very outward daily reminder goal for this group that returns a lot of talent, only loses one starter in Sal Wormley from a foundation that helped Penn State get to the college football semifinals and the Big Ten championship game last year. And it's just a lot of belief in the guys that they have starting, the depth that they have, and I guess another part or another layer of this push or this being a goal for this group is that Phil said, typically, the offensive lines that have won the Joe Moore Award have either made the playoff and have gone on runs or won the national championship. Like
Yeah.
LSU in 2019, Alabama in 2020, they won the national championships, and their offensive lines won the Joe Moore Award. Michigan in 2021 and 22, so there's a list of really good offensive lines that have been the foundation of title winning teams, and Penn State wants to be that this year.
Yeah. I think the thing that makes this Penn State offensive line so different from past years, I mean, when Troutwine first took over, they didn't quite have the stars like they had of an Olu Fashanu, or even to last year. I mean, like Drew Shelton's going to be in draft conversations, Anthony Donko, Nolan Rucci, all those guys. You might not think of them like stars, but they're going to hear their names called in the NFL eventually. It was kind of hit or miss a few years ago. You had your Rasheed Walker, your Drew Scruggs here and there. Hunter Norzad ended up sticking with the Chiefs. But right now, I mean, you can look across the front and say all five of those guys have NFL capability. And you can even look behind those first five guys and say there are backups. There are second string guys who have NFL potential in this room right now. There's just really an incredible amount of depth. And I know we've addressed it plenty of times, through the spring and everything, but it's a really good problem to have when you can't quite pick five guys to start because of what Nolan Rucci did in place of Anthony Donko down the stretch last year. We slot Cooper Cousins into that right guard spot right now. But like, could Javen Williams pick it up? Could TJ Shanahan, the Texas A&M transfer, come out of nowhere and really make some strides? Like, those things are all possible. And I think if you're going to have a group that can win the Joe Moore Award, it has to have that depth because, it's kind of anecdotal, but every O-line coach in the world will tell you we have to have about 8 guys that we feel comfortable playing throughout a year because someone's going to go down, someone's going to get banged up. It's just how it happens. And I think Penn State very, very comfortably has about 8 guys and maybe more than that this year.
Yeah, Phil was asked about that. We asked him about where he feels comfortable in terms of the number that he has right now, and now being it was the first week of June, so still summer workouts to go, training camp to go, and he was asked how many offensive linemen could you feel comfortable throwing out there starter level reps in a game, and he said, well, it depends on who we're playing.
Yeah.
He said for week 1, he was asked about week 1 against Nevada. He said 11 guys.
Wow.
So at that point, that's past the 2 deep.
Yeah.
And he said not to disrespect any opponents, but then he was asked about, say, in Oregon, the Big Ten opener at home, the whiteout to close September, or even later in the year against Ohio State. He said right now we feel like confident in 8 to 9 guys. And even that is really impressive because, like I said, it's before, it's coming out of spring camp, it's coming out of winter workouts. These guys still have time to grow and develop over the summer on their own accord. When the coaches don't have as much time due to NCAA rules with them directly, it's a lot of work with the strength and conditioning staff. It's a lot of player-led stuff. So still time to grow in that pocket of time over the next month and a half. And then you have training camp still. So who are those guys, right? It's Drew Shelton at left tackle. It's Venga Ioane at left guard. Nick Dawkins is back for his 6th season at center. You've got Cooper Cousins slotting in at right guard, presumably after JB Nelson entered the portal and left for Kansas State. And then you've got Donko or Rucci at right tackle. That's your kind of starting 6. But like you mentioned, Javen Williams, TJ Shanahan from Texas A&M transferring in, adding him, knowing that you want as much depth as possible on the interior. Alex Birchmeyer as well, still in the room, fellow 2023 signee along with Javen Williams, both high-end blue chip players. And then you continue down the list. You got some young offensive tackles. I think they're excited about Egan Boyer being one of them.
Yeah.
You've got Dominic Ruley kind of in that backup center role, but really, I think if something were to happen to Dawkins, you would slide Cousins or Ioane over to center.
Yeah.
But it's a good sign that this is where Phil Trautwein feels, where his offensive line is right now. And you would presume that as long as everyone stays healthy, they're only going to continue to get better as the season approaches and as it goes along early on.
Yeah, have to. The comment about 11 guys maybe for Nevada, but nine-ish, eight or nine for Oregon makes me think that there are probably some young names that are in that grouping too that he kind of just needs to see in camp a little bit more. But an encouraging sign that at least he sees that potential there. I mean, there are. We've seen Malachi Goodman on campus, the 2025 signee recently. I just caught a glimpse of him at camp last weekend, and my goodness, he looks ready. Let's just put it at that.
Yeah.
Owen Alasine as well. I know he was a guy who got a lot of buzz in the spring as one of the early enrollees, and a kid is very tall and has started to fill out a little bit. I think he's certainly going to have some growing pains as a guy who really only started playing offensive line, midway through high school. But he certainly has some potential for me. But I think it's a great group. If you want to hit a little bit on Ioane, Johnny, with that story you wrote, kind of takes us into a little bit of a little bit of what's going on with the recruiting weekend in this class as well at the offensive line. But Ioane was a 3-star when he got here, and they've done a really good job, developing him. It's actually kind of funny because, I'm sure you recall, Johnny. I'm not sure if every fan recalls, but Stacey Collins was pretty big in that recruitment a couple years ago, and when he was here for, I guess, just 2 seasons as the special teams coordinator before heading back out west to Boise State. But it certainly paid off because Ioane has been a huge piece of this thing.
Yeah. So when I was talking to Phil last week, and there were a couple other reporters in there, and when he was asked about the Joe Moore Award, and he's talking about the strength of this group and all that, my natural follow up was kind of how important is Venga to all of that,
Yeah.
and it's easier to see when you're watching an offensive line, the tackles kind of go to work. And of course, like in terms of NFL prospects, and like everyone wants to talk about the left tackle and even the right tackle. But when you watched Penn State's offensive line go to work last year and push people around, especially down the stretch when they really established the run with Katron and Nick, Big Ten championship game, CFP, like Venga was a huge part of that. Now, the most attention he got last year was when he was split out wide and coming into motion and just destroying like an edge defender.
Yeah.
Whether they were expecting it or not, he was coming down the pike. So he went viral a few times with that. But on a snap in, snap out basis, series by series, like Venga was arguably their best offensive lineman last year. And I do think people who know offensive line play kind of see that. The stats also bear it out. I mean, he was a second team All Big Ten pick by both the coaches and the media.
Mm-hmm.
Pro Football Focus it's kind of like WAR in baseball, like wins above replacement. I think they call it wins above average. He was the 4th most valuable interior offensive lineman last year in college football. And I really do think that kind of bears out when you watch him play. And so I asked Phil about his NFL prospects, about him one day going to the league. Now he has 2 more years. He has this year and another year of eligibility to use if he wants it, but he might not. Phil said he's got all the tools that an NFL scout or GM would want. And he's got the attitude. He's got a chip on his shoulder. You mentioned he was a 3-star prospect. Not only was he a low 3-star, he didn't sign with Penn State until signing day. He was originally committed to Washington, his home state.
Yep.
And, they fired Jimmy Lake, their head coach, and his recruitment was pretty much up in the air. So it was kind of just a flyer on this big dude who now at this point is 335 pounds. And as Phil Trautwein says, moves like he's 280, which is super rare for an interior offensive lineman. And so, he is such a big part of all this, and he has such a big future, not only with Penn State this upcoming season, but in the NFL beyond that. but you pair that with a guy who knows what he's doing in Nick Dawkins at center, and you pair that with a Cooper Cousins who, his ceiling is so freaking high
Yes.
that your base on the interior is you're solid. Like you are rock solid. And then you go out and Drew Shelton at the left tackle spot starting in the second year, as a second year starter. And then you got to figure out which good option do you want at right tackle. So from the inside out, this offensive line is built not only to contend for a Big Ten title, but truly to, contend for a national title. And that's why Phil Troutline believes, we can win the Joe Moore Award. We can be recognized as the nastiest, the toughest, the best offensive line in college football.
And I have to agree with him. I mean, there are not a whole lot of programs across the country that you can look at and feel as confident, this early in the summer about an offensive line as you do at Penn State, just because of the experience and the depth and, a budding star like Vanga Ioane. You mentioned Cooper Cousins and his ceiling. A couple things I wanted to hit on real quickly before we move on to talking about some recruiting for the weekend. There was a video that Penn State put out there recently with Cooper Cousins at a charity event. That was freaking awesome. He is a great kid. He's been big in the community as well with James Franklin, and that was one of those things that goes beyond the field. That was really cool to see. If you haven't seen it, you can scroll through their social media, the Penn State accounts, and Coop, like you said, super high football ceiling. But really a kind of a magnetic personality as well. A lot of really good dudes across that offensive line, really across the board. I think all the guys we've talked about have really been a joy to cover and speak to. But really good display from Cooper Cousins recently, and I wanted to give that a shout out. But
one thing to add on that too, because I asked Phil, I'm like, Cooper Cousins, he's a sophomore, right? Like he enrolled last January, and he was with the team as an early enrollee coming in as a 2024 signee. But it feels like he's been around the program for much longer. And I think a part of it is how frequently people have talked about him, whether that's Troutline, Franklin, even Andy Kotelnicki in the past. Obviously his teammates. That's not only the offensive linemen, but defensive linemen who have gone up against him in practice. Like, Cooper Cousins is a name that we've heard so much of over the last, year plus now, year and a half. And I asked Phil, I'm like, does he feel like a sophomore? Do you view him as a sophomore? He's like, no, not really. Like, he's been around for so long. And he's going to be such a big part of this offensive line. And it's not just on the field, like that ceiling, like you mentioned, is so high, but because he is a sophomore, he's a guy who, we talk about this offensive line being so good, and the fact that they might lose some guys going into the 2026 season, he's a future captain. Like, he's a kind of anchor that you can rely on, not only on the field, but in the locker room, on the practice field, not only in October and November, but, in spring ball over the summer. Like, he's going to be one of those guys for this program.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you look, Nick Dawkins, very different path to becoming a starting really good offensive lineman. Obviously kind of bided his time, dealt with some injury, whereas Coop was right in there. But Dawkins as well has won some, I think, Werfel Trophy last year, right? That's what it is. He won the Werfel Trophy for some community service stuff, and he, is a captain and really good. Just a reminder, like, we're live right now for everybody listening. Any questions, any comments? We got a lot of offensive line talk today, so if you want to chime in on that, always we'll try and get to you. If you're watching recorded, we appreciate you too. But let's talk some recruiting quickly before we wrap this up. It's an official visit weekend, and kind of the reason why we went offensive line heavy in this one as well is because it's a little bit offensive line heavy this weekend. The headliner is five-star offensive tackle out of Maryland, Emmanuel Iheanacho. This one is kind of interesting. It's a good sign that Penn State is stuck in it for this long. It's obviously a kid in the footprint. They always do well in Maryland. But I wouldn't necessarily, I wouldn't say I'm confident about Penn State's chances there, is maybe the nice way of putting it. But it's impressive that Penn State's still in it and getting an OV. Assuming he does make the trip on Friday. There's also a committed offensive lineman, Ben Eziuka, who is I guess, 2 weeks removed from his commitment now at this point. He, alongside committed linebacker Terry Wiggins, who wasn't able to make it up. Those are kind of the big names. But one other one that I wanted to throw out there, credit, of course, to On3 and 24/7 for these visitor lists. You can go check those out if you haven't seen them yet. But Charlie Tom from Avon Old Farms Prep in Connecticut. That is where Owen Alicine went. We talked about him a little bit. I saw Tom out at camp last weekend. Came away from that with an offer from Phil Troutwine. He's kind of a late riser, but getting on campus here, and obviously a school with some familiarity, a prospect that they've gotten their eyes on in person and liked despite the rankings. There could be some movement. Oh, and one more name that I don't want to miss is Brian Bonner, the running back. He's a 4-star, a name that's been attached to Penn State for a long time. Of course, I think you and I, Johnny, have talked about running back recruiting a lot over the past few months, and that's kind of that's kind of a rabbit hole with how good it's been and how many players are on the roster already. But that's a lot of names, Johnny. Any takes?
Yeah, it's a lot of names. I'll start with running back because that was the last thing you mentioned, and then we can get into the offensive line a little bit. Yeah, at running back, they already have Messiah Mickens committed in the 2026 class from Harrisburg. Really talented player. I think Penn State would feel comfortable if Messiah was their only running back in this class. We've talked about this before, but in 2027 they got Kamon Spell, from McKeesport, number 1 running back in the country early, but in that 2027 class committed, and then they've got a young nucleus already kind of in the room and ready for whenever, not whenever, but literally after this season when Nick Singleton and Katron Allen move on. Out of eligibility and head to the NFL. You've got Corey Smith, Quentin Martin, Cam Wallace, Tyke Hayes, and Jabri Wallace-Coleman, all already, signed on and in the room and ready to go. So, if Brian Bonner decides to stay out on the West Coast, he's from California, it wouldn't be that big of a deal for Penn State not to land him. But still, if he makes a trip, good to see him out here and potential number 2 running back in the 2026 class. But for me, it's really the offensive line that is coming into focus. Grayson McKeo from LaSalle visited last weekend.
Yep.
That's a really big target for Penn State, offensive tackle, really toolsy guy who hadn't played offensive tackle until this past season. And I'll plug it again. I think I plugged it last week, but was able to talk to his high school coach and kind of get into his recruiting rise a little bit more. Really good conversation and interesting story with Grayson, but he's among the top targets, not just on the offensive line, but overall for this group. That, like you mentioned, they got Benjamin committed a couple weeks ago. They've got, Kevin Brown from Harrisburg, already committed as one of the first commits, if not the first. And then Roseby Lubintis, who is kind of a project piece at tackle. Wouldn't be surprised if they ultimately end up with 3 more offensive linemen. I think that would be the hope to get up to that number, 5 or 6 in this class. And I mean, Ian Nacho would be a great ad, but Oregon is, looking at On3's projections and some other projections out there. Oregon is looking like the team to beat, at least at this point. But who knows, Max? Like, these official visits matter. They mean a lot in terms of how far they might go in terms of a commitment decision. This could be the last chance for Penn State to kind of prove itself to Emmanuel Iheanacho. And maybe he does stay in the region. Probably not, but maybe.
Yeah, I mean, look, there was a time when it was fairly publicly known that he was leaning toward Maryland, and now I don't even think Maryland got an OV from him. So things can always change. I do think it works in Penn State's favor that they get an OV from him a little bit later in the cycle, because it just, for whatever reason, human nature, recency bias, the last couple of places you go can maybe stick in your mind a little bit more when it comes decision time. But yeah, I'm in agreement. Offensive line's kind of similar to defensive back, like we talked about on Monday's podcast. You can never really have too many bodies there, especially because it's such a projection-based position. I mean, if you look in the 25 class, like, Brady O'Hara played tight end in high school, but they projected him better as a tackle. And so he put on the weight, and when he signed, he's going to play offensive line at Penn State, So it's kind of sometimes more about quantity and quality, but like not as much quality just on the high school tape because of the way the position is. Kevin Brown, though, is unreal. I saw him in person with my own eyes for the first time this past weekend. He is, yeah, he's not built like most 17-year-olds, let alone any college offensive lineman. Kid could probably go star in the WWE tomorrow. I'm telling you, Johnny, he is unbelievably built. Really strong kid. Saw Lubentis as well, who he's big. He's got really good size. I think there'll be some molding when he gets to Penn State eventually, but really a good, really good frame there, and I think some potential. I think you made the point, Johnny, on Monday or on a recent podcast about Penn State and some of the 3 stars that they've picked up as opposed to, going out and getting some of the 5 stars and how some of that has to do with Penn State's not going out there and offering money right away to these kids. It's not really an NIL thing to court some of these guys, but Penn State's done a really good job of projecting these 3 stars and developing. And that certainly goes on the offensive line with a guy like Vanga Ioane, who we spent so much time talking about. So Kevin Brown's the headliner right now. Iheanacho and Makio would be kind of the other big-time targets they'd like to add. Never say never on either one. I think Makio is in a better place than Iheanacho right now. Things could change, but there are still more offensive line targets out there, and the guys they've got committed, definitely some good potential.
Yeah, and just one more thing to add on that. I mean, we talk so much at the front of this podcast about how well positioned this offensive line is currently, built to potentially win the Joe Moore Award, to once again be the foundation of an offense that could make it all the way to the college football champion, like the national championship game, right?
Mhm.
If you're Phil Troutwine, when you're having these recruiting visits and these guys are coming into the Lash building and you're in your offensive line room, you're pointing to that poster, that Joe Moore Award poster, saying that's our expectation this year is to be the best offensive line in college football. And why is that? Well, because we've been able to develop these guys
Yeah.
into really good offensive linemen, and you look at, obviously Olu was the headliner in terms of a first round pick, but there have been some draft picks on this offensive line over the years, and they've got more in the pipeline, and so that's a great recruiting pitch already. I think it doubles as a daily reminder for the current guys, and then a subtle future reminder of like, hey, this is the expectation and the goal here at Penn State.
Yeah.
And so we'll see if that pays off for them on the recruiting trail as they look to wrap up these official visit weekends over the next couple.
Yeah, my bold prediction, I think Andy Kotelnicki's finding a way to get the ball in Vanga Ioane's hands this year.
I need it.
I think we all do. It will give us life. I don't think Oregon's ready for it. I'm certain that would be the best time to do it. Wink, wink, Andy.
I was low key expecting them to do it against Washington last year.
Yeah, honestly, yeah. That would have been good. That would have
With
been
him
good.
being a Washington native, like that would have been a really good time to pull it out. Also, they were up big in that game anyway. But or maybe it's one of those that you're up 45-0 against FIU in week 2, and you pull it out there just to like kind of the classic coach speak of like, oh, put it on tape, make him think about it.
Yeah, it could be. It could be. A little salt in the wound. Yeah, we all need it. Johnny, who's winning the U.S. Open?
Scotty Scheffler. I
Yeah.
mean, if not Scotty, I haven't seen the leaderboard since we started the podcast. I'm not a sicko with
Yeah,
the multiple tabs or anything. My focus is here.
Right. It's for the people.
It's for the people. If not Scotty, I like Colin Morikawa and Sepp Straka.
All right. You heard it here first. You heard it here. I don't make predictions because I love golf, but I don't watch the professional scene a whole lot. So I just tune in for the majors. But
I was gonna say, watching as much PGA and major golf like as I do, it's kind of depressing because then I go out on the golf course and I'm like, I can't do anything these guys do. I was at the range yesterday and boy was it terrible. I've got like an outing with my high school and college buddies on Saturday,
yeah,
and I might not pull driver like at all because I just have zero confidence in it whatsoever. And then I go and I watch these guys just stripe it down the middle of these narrow fairways at Oakmont and think about how how lucky it would have been to be able to do that when I was there for the U.S. Open Media Day last month.
Johnny, you've played with me. You know the driver stays in the bag, and I'm 3-wood only off the tee. So there's no shame in that. Just put it in the fairway. That's all that matters.
Exactly.
Folks, thank you for tuning in. If you were here live, thank you. If you are watching on the recorded version, every Thursday, noon, me and Johnny. Soon it'll be me and Bob. Johnny's got some PTO coming up. It's not next week. It's 2 weeks, right?
So next Wednesday, I head out. So next Monday will be our last pod together before I jet off and Bob hops back in.
Perfect. Yeah. Well, you'll be seeing a lot of me over the next few weeks while Johnny's gallivanting somewhere else. But thanks all for tuning in. As always, this has been the Blue White Breakdown on PennLive. Take care.